Welcome to the Current Report podcast. I'm Cece Woods, investigative reporter, and my co-host Prime joins me.
Yes.
And we have a special regular guest, former LAPD Assistant Chief Labrada.
All right. Good morning, everyone.
How are you? Good morning.
Prime?
Yes, sir.
Let's talk about these riots. They are not protests. These people are so, I'm just going to say it, fucking crazy.
Yeah.
That they are mistaking TSA agents for ICE and swarming them.
Well, this appears to be a case of mistaken identity. Some TSA officers were eating dinner here. Someone thought they were ICE, and then the crowd showed up. Whistles and horns blaring of anger in Linwood.
Real agent got this from ICE.
A crowd of anti-ICE protesters swarming a restaurant after reports that off-duty ICE agents were inside. But law enforcement sources tell Fox 11 this may be a case of mistaken identity. The agents weren't ICE, but instead TSA officers eating dinner.
ICE.
LA County Sheriff's deputies called in for crowd control, eventually calming the situation.
Let's talk about LAPD's response, because a large portion of these areas, the riots are taking place in our LAPD's jurisdiction, correct?
That's correct, yes. The federal building is one of the biggest focal points for this. This has been a challenge not only for the recent ICE issues, but looking back at what happened with George Floyd as well. You know, a lot of the things that are happening, not only in LA, Chicago, other major cities really is where this is all sparking. And I think a lot of it has to do, from my experience, I was there during the 2020 unrest. I was the operations chief for 14 days. And one of the biggest frustrations we saw was the almost welcoming environment created by our local elected. You know, they're almost supporting this type of behavior, this type of action. And us as officers are trying to address not only the looting, the rioting, but we're given a difficult task in the fact that we're losing tools. You know, you recently saw LAPD lose a 40 millimeter, and being able to use a lot of the less lethal that is required to address these issues.
Now, the lawsuit that led to this ruling was filed back in 2020 after the summer of George Floyd protests. Many demonstrators back then complained that police were using these weapons without justification. LAPD policy says they're only supposed to be used if someone presents a threat to police, but they're not there to just get people to follow directions or as punishment. The launchers use a small gunpowder charge to fire a foam round. It can knock people over, it can get them to drop weapons, but at close range, they can also cause very serious injuries.
And then you have on the background, you have the political agenda of trying to entice those protesters and agitators to come out and take the streets.
These ICE agents, by the way, are undertrained. They're trigger happy. They're a bunch of bounty hunters who don't know what they're doing. And it is time, and I'm calling on Kristi Noem to get her ICE agents out of our cities. Get them out of Minneapolis, out of respect today, but get them out of Los Angeles County and every other city in this country. Take them back somewhere else. We don't want them. We don't need them.
It's a losing battle for a lot of these officers nowadays.
Yeah, so I think one big concept here is the guise that's going on here. You know, it's without a doubt riots for sure, but it's under the guise of protest. And that's what a lot of the people that are not living in Los Angeles and looking at this through this eyeglass of social media and legacy media, they're stating that, oh, this is, going back to what you stated with the whole George Floyd riots, they're speaking as if it's peaceful protest. However, the people that are actually there obviously attest to that And you could obviously see that it's riots, without a doubt, riots, not peaceful protests, not there to just speak their minds with their little signs. It is without a doubt riots for sure.
Yeah, and the media really just pushes that environment or pushes that agenda, because what they show is, yes, you see protesters getting injured, you see individuals getting arrested, but they don't show the actions that led to that. And much of that is, individuals out there throwing rocks and bottles to our officers, destroying police cars, destroying federal, local buildings, property of the taxpayers, but also just willingness to harm individuals, not only the officers, but one another. We've seen reporters getting attacked, assaulted, and it's under the ruse of we're fighting ICE, or we're fighting what they're calling difficult or traumatic access by ICE to local communities. But yet they're doing this with violence. So how do you justify that when you're trying to get a message out that you're here to try to calm the peace or do a peaceful protest? There's nothing peaceful about these groups.
I have talked to multiple reporters from other news media organizations, and one of which I was talking to about something that was separate from the protests and immigration. But to your point, the media pushes a completely false narrative, and they're trying to make it seem like, oh, these are just protests, when we can plainly see that this is just straight violence, riots, destruction, and people are getting hurt, including reporters. And I asked this reporter about and this is a reporter from California Post. Okay, everybody's all like, yay, California Post. No, not yay, California Post. They may be doing better than some of the other publications, but I can tell you that one of the reporters that I talked to basically told me about a certain case that I was working on, and any other of those stories that I talked with this person about, the salacious headlines, the clickbait headlines. Yeah. And he told me that the newsroom just wants us to go with whatever the vibe is.
Wow.
And they don't want us to write any more than 600 words. If you think about the majority of these publications that have that same kind of churn and burn newsroom, you're never going to get the truth, ever. It's very frustrating for me, because I was even looking at the headline that you posted on Twitter earlier today that you tagged me in about the $400 billion or whatever, homeless money.
Homeless money, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not breaking news, right? But these guys are putting out the headlines that they know that people are going to want to click on, even though it's not new news, right? So they're going to kick up that news story headline to another level to make sure that they're getting your attention.
Right.
And
well, to caveat on that,
it's not about the truth. It's not about the truth.
You're absolutely right. And see, let's look at the average person reading the article, right? Someone who's the average Joe that, lives in Los Angeles. A perfect example would be that one recent article pertaining to that little one, the 5-year-old that allegedly got detained by ICE. If you look at Fox's news headline, it literally just states, in big bold letters, ICE detains 5-year-old. That's it. Now, the average person is not going to do a deep dive and do their research and look at the circumstances as to what happened. They're going to look at that headline and immediately come up with their own conclusion and their own hate speech pertaining to that.
Yes. And that kid was actually abandoned by his father, who was an illegal alien, a criminal, like of master proportions.
This week, ICRO conducted targeted enforcement operation to arrest Adrian Alexander Conejo Arias, an illegal alien who was released back into the interior of the United States by the previous administration. When officers approached Conejo Arias, he and his child were in a vehicle. Arias fled from law enforcement on foot, abandoning his child in the middle of winter in a vehicle. One of our officers stayed behind with that child while other officers apprehended his father. After conducting the arrest, my officers stayed with the child. They cared for him, took him to get something to eat from a drive-through restaurant, and spent hours ensuring he was taken care of. Again, my officers did that, not his father. My officers did everything they could to reunite him with his family. Tragically, when we approached the door of his residence, the people inside refused to take him in and open the door. Let me say it again. They saw the young boy and they refused to open the door and take him back. This is the human side of the job that my officers do. They are family men and women. They have children of their own. They sacrifice everything for their families. I know for a fact that they were heartbroken to see the child's own family leave him behind. Fortunately, Conejo Arias eventually requested that his child stay with him. We do everything in our power not to separate families. So they took him back together to Minneapolis, here to the city, to the ICE facility for processing, and now they are being well cared for at a family residential center, pending their immigration proceedings.
Abandoned his own kid. That's the real story. But let's get back to
media bait.
Yeah. That's all it is.
Media
and that includes this environment of misinformation that is fueling more violence. It's such a strange time right now. It really is such a strange time.
It's hurtful deflection because the public's being misled of what really is happening out there. And you're right. Those folks that aren't doing the research, which most people are living their lives, having to work, do things. They're not going to do the research. And that's why the media has a lot of control of the information, because they're misleading. You know, particularly our LA Times, they're so misleading with information that they provide to the public because it sells newspapers, or it sells their agenda, really is what it is.
Well, interesting that you say that, because the one California Post reporter that I was talking to about another case, this reporter has been reading all of my articles, so knows that I have provided proof in this case that what has been reported is not true. Okay.
Wow.
And this reporter basically didn't care, did what the bosses told him to do. And I'm just like, how do you sleep at night? How do you people sleep at night? Honestly, I just don't understand it. How do you look in the mirror? How do you sleep at night?
Yeah, and I think a lot of that too, Cece, and I mentioned it at the beginning, was that a lot of that has to do with the control that the local elected have. You know, really, just they're under the thumb of the local elected. You know, if you look at a lot of the challenges that, you know, the things that have happened in City Hall that are controversial, if you see the report, they rarely cover it. You know, they barely just maybe put a snippet on it. You know, you had the deputy mayor that was arrested for false bomb threats. He got a conviction. And they put a little tiny blurb in it. This is the guy that was in charge of Homeland Security for the city of LA. Yeah. And yet they just put a small blurb in it just to kind of say, okay, we covered it, but we really don't want it to go out. It's disheartening.
Yeah, so that whole story got lost in the wind after that.
Yeah, it did.
That's significant.
So let's talk about the heat that Jim McDonnell is taking right now.
So, you know, it's a lot been said regarding the mask. I think you covered it as well on a recent article, but you know, kudos to Jim. He did step forward and say, we're not going to do this. It's really, you know, LAPD has a history of really supporting the community, whether Hispanic, whether, you know, Asian, whether, you know, undocumented or not. They do a really good job of supporting the community. I get it. You know, the trust issue is important. However, when you come to policies and you know, this assembly bill that was created to try to enforce masks against federal agents, it's not only unrealistic, it's just like Jim said, poorly planned.
Back in September, Governor Newsom made this directive banning federal ICE agents from wearing masks here in Southern California. You have said that you disagree with that and that your department will not be enforcing that ban. First of all, tell us why.
I think just from a legal standpoint, there's a stay on that right now. There's a judge reviewing that case. So in the short term, there's a stipulated agreement that there will be no enforcement of that law in the state of California. So we're waiting to see what the outcome of that is. But from a practical standpoint, tactically, our role when we get to a scene is to de-escalate the situation, not to ramp it up. Trying to enforce a misdemeanor violation on another law enforcement agency, that's not going to end well. And that's not going to be good from a public safety standpoint for anybody in that environment. Potentially you have a crowd that could be agitated and trying to get their point across. And then you have the ICE agents who are doing their job. And for us to come in then and try and create an enforcement action for wearing a mask, it's not a safe way to do business.
Now, just the optics of getting a police officer going to arrest a federal agent, which, first of all, we can't do. But what really upsets me is reading some of these articles and reading some of these statements from the elected, our mayor, a lot of the assembly members and council and state senators saying, that Jim McDonald is picking and choosing laws. Going back to a lot of these unrest, we've made numerous. I ordered arrest of over 1,000 people during 2020. And guess what? The mayor, the city attorney, and back then George Gascon came forward and said, we're not going to charge these individuals for, because of the optics and charging individuals with failure to disperse, with throwing objects at police officers. A lot of them are misdemeanors. But the mindset that now they're saying, well, Jim's picking and choosing laws. Hey, we are elected, and even our prosecutors are doing this, to their benefit when it's beneficial to them. They don't want to enforce laws against individuals that are rioting and protesting out our streets, destroying public property. But yet now Jim has taken a stance of common sense, and they want to try to destroy him with the same mindset. Which, you're not going to convince me that it's appropriate for him to try to enforce that.
Yeah, I think that whole bill, just in general, it was just really made just to create conflict amongst law enforcement, and they were almost successful with it. If it wasn't for Jim just speaking out about it and saying, that he's not going to enforce it. And if you really think about it, how is a LAPD officer going to go up to a federal agent and try to enforce some type of policy or some type of law that, like you said, it's going to be a misdemeanor at the most, an infraction? I think, it's conflict.
What is concerning now is that the state will probably move to try to get civil action against these peace officers or federal officers if they're out there. I could see them trying to do that, but that's going to be a long-term battle, in courts to try to do this on a civil level. But criminally, there's nothing there. We can't enforce federal agents from doing their job. We or others may not like the job they're doing or what they're required to do, but that's their job. That's what they're supposed to do. And people may not like the way they're doing it, but at the end of the day, they're not breaking the law and doing it.
That leads me to the LASD. I imagine LAPD is doing the same. They're begging, essentially, to get officers from around the country. They started up north doing their requests. Hey, does anybody want to come down here for the Olympics? And the general consensus that I'm getting is fuck no, we don't want to go anywhere near LA County. And even LA County officers and deputies that are being contacted by these other agencies because they're friends or they've moved or whatever, they're like, hey, they're reaching out to us and they want a 2-week commitment. Who wants to put themselves in a position to end up like Trevor Kirk for doing your job and facing 10 years in federal prison because these asshole loser politicians that have been installed by the Democrats are going to throw these law enforcement officers under the bus, and nobody's going to want to work here.
Well, I mean, good point. And look at what's happening now with the division that's being caused between federal and local.
Yeah.
So this is going to increase throughout this period as ICE enforcement continues and, disagreements at Capitol, the state Capitol and even the federal Capitol level keep affecting that relationship. And then when we start calling in a year, when we're getting close to the Olympics and we start calling for federal resources, whether the DHS investigators, you're going to have homeland security issues with human trafficking, narcotics, organized crime. And then you're going to require resources. We had the same challenges during the 2022 planning of the Super Bowl. We didn't have enough local canine teams to support the searches of all the venues that we had here in the city simultaneously. We had to reach out to federal partners, whether they were U.S. Marshals. And you're going to have a challenging already relationship or lack thereof, where our federal partners are going to be reluctant to deploy here because of the lack of support, not only at the state level, but here locally at the city. So it doesn't really surprise me that other local counties, which support their agencies and support their cops on the beat, are not going to want to be deployed here with the mindset of, what if I get into use of force? What if I get into an officer-involved shooting? Am I going to get charged? There's a lot of immunity still in place for these officers, but there's still the headache of like you said, Kirk, that he had to suffer the trauma that he had to deal with on his personal level, but also his career in dealing with this.
Yeah, let's not forget how deputies and just law enforcement in general are leaving in droves from Los Angeles. And the recruitment isn't as good as it was, which leads us to the academy numbers. I mean, how is that going with LAPD, sir, with the academy numbers? How many recruits are we putting out there at the moment?
Well, you just had a class graduate of 26 yesterday.
When I saw that photo, I was like, oh my God, this is dismal.
It's failures at many levels. Not only, like you said, like Prime said, recruitment. You know, you have an agency that historically was one of the most wanted agencies to work. You know, it's the most professional, you know, alongside with LA County. But now you have recruits going to small agencies. You're having them going to other counties outside of Los Angeles because they're supported. I have a friend that's a high level at the CHP. They had to stop recruitment right now because they have such a high number of applicants for the CHP in the state, and they're reaching their goals of recruitment.
Why is the state?
It's a supported agency. You know, they do have, you know, some level of respect as far as, you know.
It's so funny that you say that because the deputies that I know, they are like, they're not cops.
It's a level of work, but I'm talking about the supporting of their officers out on the beat when they're doing their job. You know, you're not getting.
I mean, no offense to CHP. I'm just saying, you know, these boys and their testosterone level. It's like, who's got the bigger one? Who's got the bigger one?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
At the end of the day, I'm sure most of them would rather work for an agency that supports them.
Oh yes,
instead of throwing them under the bus, making them work triple shifts. You know, because that's just not healthy either. So, but I think a lot of it long term is the problem is a recruitment. You know, we've talked a little bit about that. The enticing. You know, do I really want to go to LAPD when they throw you under the bus, when they, you know, they scrutinize every moment, you know, with the microscope, you know, they burn their own, I mean, which we've seen historically in many levels, but also we have a personnel department for the city of LA that's just incompetent. We have the city of LA City has a personnel department that screens all applicants. LAPD doesn't screen their applicants. LAPD gets the applicants once the personnel department approves them for hiring, which takes forever. You're having applicants wait over a year, in some cases, you know, to work. So they just go off to another agency and get hired in 4 or 6 months. So that's a big obstacle. And then again, the enticement of working for an agency, lacks thereof, of an agency that's going to support you and really just not only, you know, on the streets, but also, you know, on your personal level.
Yeah, I mean, the other concept to that too is that the people that are actually wanting to be in law enforcement, which is actually kind of rare right now, you know, they do their research despite all these recruitment videos and you know, the billboards. The actual savvy person, man or woman, that wants to be in law enforcement is going to do their research, and they're going to look at news articles. They're going to look at videos. They're going to go straight to YouTube. They're going to do whatever they can to see, just like you said, sir, how are they going to be treated in a department? And that is right now, you know, LASD is definitely not looking good whatsoever because of that. You know, so that's why they're heading over to CHP and other agencies. They're just like you said, why are they going to dedicate their life to an agency that is not going to treat them well?
Yeah, the best I've always said this, and I knew this, you know, having worked 31 years in law enforcement, the best recruiters are ourselves. So, you know, if I'm on the streets, whether I'm in uniform or whether I'm, you know, speaking at an event, somebody asks me, how's it work for LAPD? Would you recommend it? You know, if I don't see the challenges and I'm happy with an organization that supports their personnel, has policies that support their personnel. You know, we have an archaic use of force policy, a horrible internal affairs policy. And yet we're not going to try to recruit others with that environment. I'd rather just say, you know, go off to Riverside County where you're going to get much more support. Sadly, that's what it's become.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with that. And the same thing at LASD and what's going on with not only the recruitment, but command staff, the executives are begging their personnel. And I'm not just talking about patrol deputies. I'm talking about lieutenants, captains. I mean, they're asking anybody who has any type of leadership skills to stay on way past when they should be freaking retiring because they're so in desperate need of them during the Olympics, which means that, you know, all these laterals that are going to other agencies and early retirement. I mean, I was in a relationship with one of these guys that should already be retired, and the executive staff is begging him to stay on. And he was telling me, well, they want me to stay on during the Olympics. And I looked at him, and this was last year. I looked at him, I said, you're out of your fucking mind because I am already done with this schedule. I'm not going to spend 2 more years of my life or whatever it is waiting for you to have a life. You know what I mean? Yeah. I'm not doing that. So that's what's plaguing the LASD and LAPD, I'm sure. And that is not making for a healthy family environment. So it's bad all the way around. It really is.
I mean, the fatigue, I can't imagine those poor deputies, especially are the ones that are working those double shifts. You know, you're Prime can attest to this. You know, when you work that long, you know, your mind, your reaction, your ability to make quick decisions and important decisions, you start diminishing that ability. And you know, the ones that are going to suffer are first the deputies, and second the public because of the level of service they're going to get. You know, so it's a losing situation for a situation that could have been fixed years ago instead of, you know, allowing it to become what it's become now.
And these cities are not paying any less money either for the services. They're not getting discounts.
Yeah, right.
They're not getting discounts on their contracts. They're not. So anything else in closing, Prime? More questions?
It's on my end. I just feel for the people working the line, whether it be LAPD, LASD, the surrounding cities, you know, they're being hammered. And with the upcoming events, those 3 major events coming up, you know, it's not looking good. It's not looking good. And my thing is what people don't have an understanding, and I'm talking about the people that do not work law enforcement, is that this doesn't only affect law enforcement. It affects the people. It's going to affect the citizens as well. That's what people are not having an understanding about. We're all in it together, no matter what. And it's going to affect everybody.
Okay, guys. Well, I think we covered pretty much everything we need to cover for today. I'm sure there's going to be plenty more next week. So, yes. All right, we're going to sign off now. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.